And okay, here you go, gevork.
All right.
There's the mouse, and then if
How do
you
you go up and down
with the
with
arrow
this?
there, yeah,
Okay.
and then you can speak into the screen. That will be
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to sit.
okay. That's fine.
I can't sit and
So
talk.
I'll take the chair. Right? Don't
Thank
sit
you.
down.
All right. Good morning, guys. I I didn't know I have to talk about gas station, but I know that's what you guys are doing. So I'm going to talk about lightness in architecture. And I think the subject is important. Also, it relates to what you guys are doing in terms of the one of the aspects of your design between masonry or heavy construction system and the light part of that gas station. Now, in a way, this lightness doesn't need any explanation because your generation and part of my generation, we are dealing with this lightness in our everyday life. All these digital gadgets we have and text message, for example, uh, has made it implied in it the fact that you write something right now and in a second or maybe less, your friend or whoever would get the message on the other side of the world. It shows that this aspect of lightness, part of that is the lightness of the experience of lightness in that sense is experience of the time and temporality. So as more we progress, if that's the name about this technological development, then there is a density in time and the experience of temporality. It has been with us from ages ago, from the beginning of modernity. I don't know in architectural history if you have heard there were Italian futurists, avant-gardes who were pretty much in love with car speed and all these things, which in a way you guys are part of it. You guys are dealing uh, in your project. Now, when it comes to architecture, these things is a little bit the differences between lightness and heaviness is a little bit more complicated. It's more perceptual than what we experience in digital technologies and sending text messages of this kind. Uh, Ages ago, the Buckminster Fuller, the American engineer and the god of the space frame structure, he questioned architects that how much your bathroom weighs. And all his idea was that if you make out of light materials, it would weigh less than uh, masonry or concrete or other materials that you guys make a bathroom. So this uh, heaviness and lightness is what I want to talk in architecture through material change, through form, and some comparison between heaviness and lightness, but how it happens perceptually. There are a couple of books that, like this Milan Kondora's novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which I guess when I was in New York in 80s, it became a very popular book among intellectuals. And it talks about this whole notion of unbearable lightness of it's a story, love story of a woman who goes around, have a life, travels. Anyway, it's a very beautiful novel, and I guess it became a movie too with the same name. That movie was also interesting. But then we have here René Magritte, the French surrealist painter that painted this huge monasterous stone-looking object floating in the air doesn't drop. So there is a lightness implied in that huge thing, suspended in a way, impossible thing, because of the forces of gravity, nothing stays up there, has to come down. As they say, whatever goes up comes down, but this one doesn't come down and still is like that. And lately, this book, Six Memos of the Next Millennium, by great Italian novelist Italo Calvino, who died maybe 5, 6 years ago. It's a great book, and one of the chapters is titled Lightness. And I have read it several times, and you get some impressions about uh, lightness of. But ahead of all these people, Karl Marx, the German thinker, philosopher, whatever you want to call it, wrote that at the beginning of the industrialization and capitalism, wrote that all that is solid melts into the air. So in a way, there is nothing solid as such stays, and in capitalism, everything has to become light and almost disappears. And that's what is happening to us today. All these digital gadgets have kind of pushed pushed our experience of everyday life towards lightness, and nothing is heavy as supposed to be. Now, this is the first kind of paragraph of Italo Calvino, the chapter 1 in lightness. He says, I will devote my first talk to the opposition between lightness and weight, and I will make the case for lightness. This is not to say that I regard the case for weight as weaker, only that I think I have more to say about lightness. So, even in a chapter on lightness, inevitably you can't avoid talking or mentioning weight and heaviness. So they come together. Even the whole notion of something is light is relative to something is heavier than what is you consider it as light. One of the amazing, interesting projects to me by Ladovsky, one of the Russian constructivist architects and artists, is this suspended restaurant designed in 1922, which is the kind of the subject of the dialectics or relationship between heaviness of that mountains or rock-looking object in the background, and the entire restaurant beautifully suspended from it and stands there, and it kind of shows the lightness and heaviness is part of, I guess, in an analog for what you guys are doing, basically. But there are other ways of talking about this lightness and heaviness. In Zaha Hadid's first built project, Vitra Fire Station, which now is a museum, by the way, never worked as such. And Zaha was pretty much influenced by the work of Russian constructivists. And so he designed this fire station. The main body of it in the background, it's concrete volume, is basically a room. And then the roof and the entrance is like flying wings. So to me, the way I have written about this is like because the fire, those cars, they want to just get out. So there is a movement. So that canopy, so to speak, is that notion of that movement, but also is a contrast between the heaviness of the building as it looks heavy because it's made uh, uh, concrete and then the metal roof. So part of this heaviness is perception. We have that understanding of that 1 kilo of concrete looks heavier than 1 kilo of glass. But in fact, there are both, each of them are 1 kilos. But it is that look that makes, and then kind of look of materials that makes certain forms or object look light or heavy. But then, as she was a great architect and good draftsman, you can see that kind of lightness even in her sketch drawings, which she was very good at it. So that dynamic situation that you see in the organization of the building between walls and roof and whatever, then the drawing corresponds to that kind of uh, lightness. So the same idea of lightness, and here mostly about movement, because things, if they are not symmetrical, they connote an idea of a movement and some kind of dynamism, and that dynamic itself is part of our perception of lightness. So it's not literally weight thing, but the perception and also this kind of dynamic quality of the interior of the same building, even when you look at the location of the lights in the roof, they are like going like this, and that creates a sense of lightness and movement, and all these elements, like this table or desk, whatever it is, and those designs back in there, they have designed in a way to connote this disjunction and movement, so it looks dynamic, and at the same time, it looks light. So one of the issues about lightness is designs that tries to avoid symmetrical composition and create a disjunction between various elements of the design, and they, even if it's built out of concrete or masonry, but it would look light and dynamic. Uh, but her drawings also draws from Russian constructivist Casimir Malevich suprematist compositions. As you see, it just is dynamism and a sense of lightness in this painting is because these various elements of the paint surfaces, they are parallel, but they are not symmetrical to each other, but also they are moving almost in reference to each other. And also this what part of Russian constructivism is called pro, and they call it a stage between sculpture and architecture. Then you see again this composition, the elements are put together in a way that it connotes the idea of the movement and a sense of lightness. Now, all these things in among was a common subject in Russian constructivism because it happens during the uprising and the revolution in Russia in 1970. And so there was that revolution itself was a huge element of the movement and lightness, because how could you reshuffle the history of the classes and say the working class has to come now up and rule the country as such? So there was a sense of movement in that kind of revolutionary situation. So a lot of these things got ideas to me from that social unrest or revolution. And the beauty of these things is that this kind of work still looks fresh. Any nice buildings designed today in 20 years, they look outdated. But because of the quality of the historical dimension of the work, still they look fresh today. And a lot of good contemporary architects like Bernard Schumi, Rem Koolhaas, and Zaha, they were basically motivated by the work of Russian constructivists. Another example by Casimir Malevich, just a cross-shaped red. Of course, the revolution colors has to be red, and it's just a composition between a dark color circle and a red color cross-shaped thing that makes the composition kind of dynamic. If you move the cross to center it on the circle, you would lose that dynamic, so to speak, perception or look of the composition. Now, this is a beautiful building by Renzo Piano Whitney Museum in New York City, and it was completed 4 years ago. And in a way, you can see the influence or some relation between that suspended restaurant in 1920, which never got realized, with the Whitney Museum, which the walls are concrete, and then all those balconies, they are made out of steel, and they project out and create this very dynamic perception, but also in a way the contrast between steel and concrete creates that notion of the lightness as such. And this is another view of the same building, that this is the front of it, and again, even the glaze are in the background, but these stairways, which also gives you beautiful view of the Manhattan from west side, is quite fascinating work of architecture. Now, another work of Russian constructivist by Melnikov, a great architect. This is the USSR pavilion in Paris in 1924. You can see the dynamic or lightness of the project. Particularly, they used very prefabricated woods that were kind of delivered from Russia and assembled in the site. But what makes it, in addition to that lightness of the dimensions of the wood and kind of use of extensive glazing and particular form of the roof, which is very dynamic, is aspects of the design that makes it look light and dynamic. In addition, when you look at the plan, the stairways that takes you up, they are diagonal, so they are shifted from the rectangular maybe plan of the rectangular geometry of the plan. So that also creates a sense of dynamism by shifting, like those painting, shifting the relationship of two elements in the plan together, and also the materiality here again, wood and glass. And this is another view to show that diagonal stairs that goes up, and the form or the emphasis on the stair by those dynamic roof element, and a lightness even on the mullions of the glass here. Everything is articulated and detailed to look that notion of lightness. The other one is another wood pavilion he designed in the city. But when it came to design his own house, is a cylinder, and it looks quite heavy masonry object and with perforated windows. But then interior space, there is a dynamic but split level interior space looking into each other. But one of the greatest project of this likeness is by Le Corbusier Heidi Weber Museum in 1965. And here one of the elements of the likeness is delivered through a roof. And not only the roof in its material, but the way the roof is disengaged from what is covering, which are these almost light-looking boxes, and the roof doesn't sit on it, but is left there. So there's a space between the roof and also those objects, which almost like Melnikov's USSR pavilion. They are using light and elements that their dimension looks like, and the color, all these things help. But also the dynamism achieved by the reversal of the form of the roof, that they are upside down against each other. The plan is quite interesting. It shows, again, part of the achieving that separation between roof and what is underneath of it is to detach the structural element from the main body. And then there is this stair or ramp, which is made of concrete, as you see part of it. And here you see both the flying section of the roof, and which adds to that lightness and dynamic aspect, but also the way it has been lifted up by columns that, interestingly enough, they are in different sizes, like this one, and different from that. And these cabinets almost made out of light elements. And then here you see the contrast between concrete ramp and then the entire structure of the building. It's quite fascinating work to me in terms of probably a pavilion, but also so here the roof, how the roof relates, what is underneath of it, it becomes the subject that architects try to manipulate, so to speak, or design in order to get this sense of lightness. And in section, you can see two things. One is that the contrast between the floor concrete here and whatever located underground, and then these boxes and the roof and the space between the roof and between the element of roof and what is covering beneath it. And this is the interior view of that, and you can see here even the contrast between lightness and heaviness, the heavy looking stairs of the concrete, and then other elements that are metal or wood or panels. I don't know what is made of it, but overall you can see this contrast between material, color, as a subject of architects to look into it or design to deliver this notion of emptiness. One of the early houses by Frank Lloyd Wright, the American architect, Horkley House, here it shows the beginning of this, how to treat the roof, what to cover. In this work particularly, you can see the support system goes up, but there is extensive windows beneath the roof. It gives the roof light-looking quality, almost like floating. Here, the forms of the roof helps this notion of the perception of lightness and movement in another house by right. But this notion of lightness and in terms of materiality, but the literal notion of the lightness goes back to this Crystal Palace in 1854 in London by John Paxton, who was not architect at all. The entire building is made out of prefabricated iron and glass. That's all it is. And this is the interior of the exhibition. So the whole building has become a perforated object. So the light, the fact that light comes from everywhere, from roof, walls, everything, and the dimensions of the material, the iron posts and girdles, everything, it gives that sense of lightness as a beginning of architecture that pianos with the museum we saw is a further development of that perception. And one of the earliest versions is this Georges Pompidou Center in Paris, designed by Renzo Piano, which everything, this, even the escalators, all structural elements are in the facade, and the space between this facade and the rear facade is an empty box because as a museum they wanted a space that columns doesn't make a visual issue. So you can see this is one of the early manifestations of the architecture that we saw in Pakistan's Crystal Palace. And the other, this is the rear view, and this is the side view. As you see, all the mechanical things which are in this case, and the scale of the building is a big issue. They have put it on exposed outside, and here you see all kinds of the connections and between columns and trusses are exposed to provide an empty, suspended almost thing. Renzo Piano actually has been very active in articulating this roof as a light element in architecture. Because if you design a box and if you don't see the roof, you just see a box. But to show this notion of the lightness, the roof has to exceed the periphery of what is beneath it. So in all previous projects, that's what is happening in Le Corbusier and others, is that the roof exceeds the periphery of what is here. But then Le Corbusier made a double attempt by separating the roof from what is beneath it. And this is a beautiful project by Piano, Weiler Foundation. You can see the exterior walls are masonry or concrete walls, and the roof is just glass and metal, and they sit above the walls, which gives that sense of lightness to the project. And one of his latest projects in Greece is this cultural center. Again, you see that hovering roof above, and then supported with very tiny columns, which give next to water and glazed spaces provides a strong sense of lightness as such. Again, back to Russian constructivism, these are beautiful drawings by Chernikov because factory fantasy. Here it's more the compositional quality of various elements that gives that dynamic dimension, but also a sense of lightness as such. These are provocative projects even today when you look at it in terms of what architects potentially can achieve today. As I was saying, Bernard Schumi is one of the architects who is influenced by Russian constructivism. These are the follies or pavilions in Parc la Villette in Paris. All these structures are made out of concrete, but cladded with red metal plates. So they look light because you don't see the concrete color and the heaviness we are used to associate with it. And also this lightness of elements, especially those above the base, which is a cube, the composition again delivers this notion of lightness as a perception, but also in terms of the materiality. I guess this is my last image, which is a gas station, I guess in Italy. All those things I said about all those buildings, you can see here. One is the form of the section of the roof, even though it looks made out of concrete, but it's very dynamic because of the design of the section of it. And the section, I mean, this, it looks that. But then the second dimension that makes the whole thing light is because the roof is separated from what is underneath of it. Here the separation is not like Le Corbusier, but it is more like Renzo Piano and Frank Lloyd Wright, is that these are glazed glasses separating the roof from what is beneath it. And then, of course, the contrast between this almost opaque volume with few kind of perforation adds to the whole story, that this contrast between heaviness and lightness. So this, my whole attempt today was just to tell you about this, how to create light through design, specific design of the roof, how to separate the roof from beneath it, and also the perception of materiality. But this is a good example to me because the material almost is concrete looking material, but still the composition looks dynamic, and added to it, that of course always is this suspension of the roof that extends what is beneath it. So if you think about these 3-4 kind of points that I made quickly here, I guess you can think about your design in a different way, because you guys are doing the gas station, which has one part is solid because of that, but the other is the roof that you guys have to design in reference to, because this also is the part that movement takes place. The cars moves here, come and go, so you can't put any object except this gas pump, fuel pump machines. So but it has to be covered reasonably because of the weather issues and all that. So suspended roof is another factor. Now, this design of the gas stations, unfortunately, it has become now very standard because of the corporations they run that. Is like even if you take Audi car, their design for their service buildings everywhere around the world is the same design. So this is part of the corporation, is trademark. But at school, you guys have to be creative and free and design the best possible gas station that you can find a similar thing in the real world, so to speak. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the all? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think what we'll do now, I put out an announcement about assignment one. I'll just give you a little bit of feedback about assignment one, and then I might invite Jack and Melanie to come up as well. And then after that, what we'll do is we'll do what we did last week. So everybody puts up their models on the table, and then we'll just have a walk around as well. Okay, so now. I was quite happy with the results from assignment one. I think you all did quite well. I mean, we had a high turnout, which was good. I think that there a couple of things that you guys seem to be some of you guys seem to be struggling with. One was with the software, yeah, to try and get the digital software to actually do what you wanted it to do. I think that is something that obviously is a work in progress. But the net effect of that is that if you can't make the software do what you want it to do, then maybe what you should do is actually look at a different way of doing it. Because I think what's important to remember in terms of a design class is that you're trying to communicate with the people who are marking your assignments. So it's a form of communication. So the first duty, I suppose, of the first aim that you should do is to get that communication across. The way it looks is actually secondary to how it's actually communicated. So you may have the most beautiful looking thing, and there were some really beautiful looking things, but if it's not communicating the idea, then it's not working that well. Okay, so I would. This is something that you guys will slowly get better at. So don't worry too much about it. But remember that the first thing is that you need to communicate the information. So it's just small things like, with those relationship diagrams. What I was doing was I was just following the lines around to see how one actually used those things. And in some cases, to pay for your petrol, you actually had to go through the restaurant because there was no line directly linking the petrol pumps and the actual convenience store itself. So just really basic things like that, but at the end of the day, we can only grade what we can see. The scores were a little bit low, I suppose, in many ways, and one of the reasons for that was because the final criteria, which was really to take an existing petrol station and to see how that worked in terms of our own program. A lot of people didn't actually look at that. Okay, so it was worth 12% of the grade. So really, I think that actually pulled a lot of people's grades down. Now, having said all that, the first exercise was worth 20%. Okay, so for those of you who haven't gone so well, don't worry too much about it because it's only worth 20% and we still have 80% of the grade to go. Yeah, this next exercise that we're doing now is worth 30% of the grade, and then the final exercise is going to be worth 50% of the grade. So there's plenty of time and plenty of opportunity for you guys to pull your grades back up. Okay, so let me. Jack, do you want to say something? Come up here and say something, and Melanie after Jack.
Well, thank you for your effort to putting the report together. Majority of them, you guys have done well. And like John said, it's just the basic is that the communication. So if you don't communicate well, or that means if you're not really presenting and expressing your basic information to other people, and then it's unfortunately doesn't go well. So doesn't matter how beautiful or colorful that is, the base is that you effectively communicate, efficiently communicate with other people. So I found that quite a few people struggle to actually put the proper introduction together. So I asked my tutor group to consider, like, if you are showing that to your family members or friends who don't know anything about the project, and then if they don't understand your project, that's a problem. So, good introduction, and also the probably the sequence of pages together. So, introduction, the site analysis, and the functional analysis, and then the typological research. So, if you do this sequence mixing up, and then some people I found no introduction, but then the typological research at first, so that the people who's looking at those reports don't have no idea what's really happening. So I think it's a good idea to just show the other people before, and then because you are actually thinking project all the time, so you may not really finding that that's a problem, but then try to show that to other people and see if what they actually react and what their responses are. Thank you.
Mel?
I think you guys did really well, but like John said, the marks were lower, so that means it was skewed. And it wasn't because that it wasn't good, it's just that you were missing things. So my advice would be to read the assignment and read everything criteria-wise in the assignment, make sure, make check, just go through it and tick it off as you go. I think that's where a lot of you just kind of came unstuck. There was just things missing that we asked for. But otherwise, I think those of you who can actually, in terms of communicate really well, focus on some of that more than the information. So maybe sharing with each other would probably help, because I know that your group are very good at presentation skills. So maybe get together, and studio is collaborative too. So for this assignment, there shouldn't be too much difference in analysis. Maybe in your functional analysis, you guys should have individual ideas and a creative response. But I think for the analysis part, it should all be pretty much similar because the site didn't change for everyone, it's the same site. So maybe my advice would be, focus on the next two assignments if you're worried. But otherwise, good work. And maybe be a bit more collaborative together, share a little bit more, especially information that's not going to change. I mean, don't steal ideas from each other, but sharing ideas is good. But thank you anyway.
Now, I think it seemed like some people had a few printing issues. So nowadays, when we say printing, it's not only about making a physical copy, but it's also about printing a PDF copy. Yeah. So a few of my students had a lot of trouble with the scale. So, and this was primarily a printing thing, printing from the software to PDF and then printing the PDF out. So this is it's really good that you guys have had a go at this. So this is something that you guys have to have a look at before the third assignment, because what we need as architects is things need to be printed up to scale. And it's very important that you guys get on top of that. Again, it's just a matter of making it work, printing it out, having a look at or checking to see whether the scale is right or not. If it's not right, having a go at fixing it up in the program itself. If you still can't do that, it could be as dumb as really enlarging or reducing the scale on the color copier, the page itself, so the scale becomes correct. Yeah, so this is this. I think with this kind of work, certainly we all need a plan B. So if it doesn't work out, we need to have a plan where we can actually put something in that fulfills the requirements of the assignment. So for me, when I was grading them, if it was not to scale, that was a very important thing. No matter how beautiful it was, people got marked down for not having it to scale because that was a requirement. Now, with this assignment, I kind of broke my own rule about lateness. So I just took the first assignment that was handed in. That to me then became the submission. If let's say you handed in your physical copy on time and then you handed in your digital copy late, I just ignored the fact that one of them was late. Okay, so I think moving forward, what I'd like you to do is to have both submissions, the physical submission and the digital submission in on time. Yeah, so the good thing was that most of you actually got at least one of them in on time, and many of you got both of them in on time. Okay, so there were penalties applied only if both the digital and the physical submissions were late. And so that was 5% per day of the grade itself, which I've marked up as a comment on the feedback. If you see no comment about lateness, then it didn't apply to you. Okay, I understand some people have 6 certificates and what have you, and of course we respect that. But for the next couple of assignments, I will be a bit more strict in terms of applying the late penalties. Okay, so are there any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you give us an example of exactly what's supposed to be handed in for submission? Have you got an example of a very good assignment that's been handed in, or so we can actually visually see it?
Yes. So the really good examples of that kind of analysis were the samples that I showed in the lecture.
Okay, so you don't have anything from like the ambulance project or something, finished project?
Of this assignment?
You have to hand in an A4 and 100%, so I'm just wondering if you've got an example of that, of exactly the content.
For the second assignment? Or for the first assignment? For the first assignment?
For the second one. For the one that we're working on now with ours.
Okay, I'll have a look for something for you. Yeah, but basically, in terms of the thanks for reminding me, by the way. I'll put out a more detailed assignment sheet. Yeah, and I'll probably include a sample of that as well. But essentially, with this kind of assignment, what you want to do is of course show us the things, the final models. But we also want to see your working method. So I'll put out a bit additional information.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just an example of how you'd like to present it.
And also the information in it. So I think what's important is to show your process through the additional thing. But I'll put out an additional thing to help you through that. So that's why I sent out that announcement about not throwing out your old models or recalling your early models, your preliminary models, because all those will go to show us that you've taken a certain process through
So do you want
the
it actually
exercise.
represented like a report with notations and arrows pointing to the actual process. So when I started this model, this is what I did.
Because we're presenting it, we'll be presenting out in the presentation space in 2 weeks. I'll put something up, but it'll be put up on the wall. So what you have is you have a couple of panels on the walls, not very big, and then your models on the base there. So we can have a look at the panels to see how you're thinking, your thought process or design process through your early models, and then the final ones.
Okay, so A2.
Probably I would probably make it A3 just because we can then take them down and that will form your physical submission.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you've got an example, it would be great. Then we all.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing I want to say is next week is week 8, but I will be here on the Tuesday. So for any of you who want to talk to me, please make please. Okay, let me back up the talking to me truck. So first of all, Tuesday of next week, Tuesday morning of next week, I'll be here. I'll just bring myself and sit myself here in the morning. So if any of you want to talk to me at that time from any of the classes, please do. And also just a reminder, if you want to talk to someone outside of class time, I'm the go-to guy. So come and see me. My office hours are on the Thursday, as per the unit outline. But if you can't make the Thursday, we can certainly see whether we can fit you in somewhere else. Okay, one of the great things about having a sessional staff from industry is we get their industry perspective and their experience, and gives you a different approach to the full-time staff. But unfortunately, one of the minuses is that they can only see you during class time. So if you guys need anything to do with this class, please come and see me during my office hours, or send me an email to talk to me otherwise. Okay, any questions? Any more questions? All right, so just 2 quick announcements. What I'll do today is return you your assignments, and for those of you who did get 2, I'll also return a couple of your assignments for that as well, to your tutorial groups. But the first thing we should do is to just form into our tutorial groups and put our models on the table, and then we'll move on from there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.